The truth, it is a beautiful thing and should therefore be treated with great caution. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today revolves around Sri Lanka's fate at the United Nations Human Rights Council sessions this time around. Where do we stand in the eyes of the international community? Joining us this evening on the show are Nilandan Niruthan, defense analyst. Also joining us tonight on Face the Nation is Professor Attorney at Law Pratibha Mahanamaheva, former Commissioner, Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka, Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director, National Peace Council of Sri Lanka, as well as Ambika Satguranathan, former Commissioner, Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka, and has worked very closely with the UN system prior to her assignment. So let's start off tonight's show with Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director, National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. Dr. Pereira, where do we really stand with regard to the United Nations Human Rights Council sessions now? Because we are aware that the Sri Lankan government co-sponsored 30/1, the resolution in 2015. However, the present regime said that they are withdrawing from the resolution in question. However, now it seems we are in the spotlight again in the eyes of the international community with regard to the UNHRC sessions. Why so?
Well, thank you for inviting me for this very important session. The problem that Sri Lanka is facing is that having signed, having co-sponsored the resolution, the UNHRC resolution in 2015, we, first of all, did not fully implement it. And thereafter, we have now withdrawn from it. And but we have made commitments. Our government has made commitments to the UN system, to the international community, to the Sri Lankan people also. But we have not kept our commitment. Now, the government, the present government, when it withdrew from the resolution in, I think, February of last year, it said that it would come up with an alternative. It would come up with an indigenous model of reconciliation, a different reconciliation process. But we have not, but the problem is that we have not seen what this reconciliation process is. It has not been satisfactory enough to the international community, which is now contemplating another resolution. And the UN Human Rights Commissioner has come up with a very strong report on Sri Lanka, which needs to be answered, because in that report she has made many recommendations which could be detrimental to the country, to the leadership of the country, such as asking for targeted sanctions against individuals, and asking for the employment of the principle of universal jurisdiction, which means that any country in the world that has in its legal system the ability to put cases against those accused of human rights violations can do that. If those
Sri Lankan
people are
government has already submitted its written response to the UNHRC Commissioner's report. So how is this going to boil down now, Dr. Pereira? The government had rejected the allegations and have said that these allegations that have been leveled have been very biased and are not substantiated. So what is happening now?
Well, so now we have to see. We first of all, we don't know what we know that the government said that they are going to reject this report, but I have not seen what the government's response has been. And the other thing is, how will the 47 countries that constitute the Human Rights Council, how will they react to this? Because those who have come up with the report, the UN Human Rights Commissioner's office, that is the secretariat, that is the sort of the bureaucracy of the UN Human Rights Council. But the political wing of that, which is the Human Rights Council consisting of 47 countries, it is they who will then decide what should be done. They will judge Sri Lanka, the Human Rights Commissioner's report, as well as Sri Lanka's response, and then they will come up with their own idea of what should be done to take this process forward. Now that is up for negotiation at this time.
But let's say, Dr. Jehan, that in the event that targeted sanctions are going to be brought forward against Sri Lanka at the next resolution, hypothetically, such a decision can be vetoed at the UN Security Council, right? And that means there won't be any basis for the resolution in question.
That is true. No, but it would still keep the door open to individual countries. Once, if the Human Rights Council passes a resolution advocating targeted sanctions or universal jurisdiction, then it gives a certain moral legitimacy to other. It will also give an opening to other countries that believe that Sri Lanka needs to go through this process, or that human rights violations took place and there is no accountability, for them to take action individually in their own courts. It would leave, and last time in 2014, for instance, prior to 2015, Sri Lanka did contest and try to fight against this, and it came at a heavy cost, because we lost, for instance, the EU GSP Plus, which we then regained subsequently, I think 2017, after agreeing to the co-sponsored 2015 resolution. So it can be costly to Sri Lanka if the UN Human Rights Council comes up with an adverse resolution which we oppose and then we lose. Maybe we won't lose it, but if we do lose, it would create a very bad image in the world and open the door for individual countries also to take action.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. We now move our attention to Professor Attorney at Law Pratibha Mahanamaheva, former Commissioner, Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. Now, it's not as easy as it sounds, is it, Professor? Why am I saying this? Is 2015, the government co-sponsored the 30/1 UN resolution. However, Minister Dinesh Gunawardena, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of our government now, said that they are withdrawing from the resolution, and then it seemed in the eyes of the people of Sri Lanka that Sri Lanka is not going to give any recognition for the resolution in question, and we don't want to be a part of the resolution in question. However, now it seems that we are in the spotlight again. And Secretary to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have already submitted a written response to the reports submitted by the UN Human Rights Commissioner. And Minister Dinesh Gunawardena, who is the Minister of External Affairs, is due to address the UNHRC sessions via a video link when it starts on the 22nd of February. So not as easy as it is.
Shamir, before that, 2018, former President of USA, Donald Trump, he withdrew their representative because of an issue where UNHRC is not taking any action against Israel. I'm showing you this, right? So therefore, based on that issue, they withdrew. So that means a co-sponsor was not there from 2018 to 2020
no, but,
officially.
But let me correct you there, Professor. I think what happened was, because the UNHRC was taking action against Israel and there was targeted sanctions to be imposed on Israel, that is the reason that Donald Trump withdrew from
yes, I am telling
from
the co-sponsor was not there from 2018 to 2020. And we also officially withdrawn from that. This is not a courthouse. This is not a tribunal. You read the UNHRC mandate to promote, to support, to respect, monitor human rights. Passing resolutions, isolating countries, it's a violation of their mandate. That's what I'm telling. And also, the report what they have prepared, and the new things are there, right? Lot of new things are there. Why I am telling this? Most of these issues are internal issues. If you see one by one, militarization of civilian government functions. If the people of the country if they have given a mandate to a government, let's implement it. How come these issues are coming internationally violated? Even USA, they appointed their top secretary from a military person. So be balanced. I mean, not to target only one country. And then you can see the constitutional reversal of constitutional safeguards. So people gave their mandate to the parliament as well as to the new president. So this is where all these are internal issues and they are targeting unnecessarily on this. I mean, they can advise, that's a different matter. And also they can help us to promote and protect human rights. But whatever in this, the government rejected this based on what? The present scenario. And also most of the time, once again, they are coming with war crimes, human right violation, police abduction. Lot of things are there. I don't want to explain one by one.
Yeah, Professor Mahanameheva, you spoke about the US withdrawing from the UNHRC sessions because it was biased towards countries. However, we are all aware that decisions taken by Donald Trump during his tenure in office was not done with logic in mind. You must be also aware that the current US regime is rejoining the UNHRC sessions as well to give it some strength or give it some boost. So what do you have to say about this?
Now, before Human Rights Council, Human Rights Commission was there. Why they dissolved the Human Rights Commission? These people were doing politics. 2006, they dissolved Human Rights Commission, UN Human Rights Commission. Once again, they came with Human Rights Council. This is where they keep the Western countries need some type of mechanism to control certain countries like Sri Lanka, one country. Maybe other countries are there, communist countries. So I mean, they are not actually, doing their work to support the countries. Now, the resolution which came up in Tamil Guardian, if you go to Tamil Guardian website, the new resolution is very risky one. That is where one visa
the new resolution is not out yet.
No, it's out. I'll tell that. You can, rebut that. So this is my opinion to tell this, but it was there in the Tamil Guardian. It was specifically there. Number one, where to seize the assets of some selected senior military officers, not one military officer at that time. And then visa restrictions. And the last one, credible evidence with them, because they have done certain investigations. I don't know, credible or trusted. Certain former army officers now in Geneva, they are giving all the evidence. Yes, I heard this senior officer is giving, directions, orders to kill innocent Tamils. Like that they give. Okay. So what they target finally, the forces they have done all these type of war crimes, and therefore they want to push this to ICC. UNHRC, they don't have that mandate. So they pass this resolution and they take this to, Security Council, and then from that only they want to send, because we have not signed the convention against war crimes.
Professor, the reason which contradicts your statement is the fact that we saw the US Secretary of State in the previous regime visited Sri Lanka just prior to the US presidential elections a few months ago, that is last year. However, the discussion about Shavendra Silva's entry to the US has been banned, was not discussed. If the government presently in Sri Lanka is on the same wavelength as was the government in the US at that time, why wouldn't that be solved amicably? Already, despite the fact that we're talking about targeted sanctions being imposed, already targeted sanctions have been imposed by the United States government on Sri Lankan military personnel who fought the war in the country.
Not only US, General Jagat Dias in Germany, luckily he came up, and General Jagat Jayasuriya, he was a Belgium former ambassador. So individually they are taking actions. This is where the revenge come up. This is where the misinformation given. These people were involved in war crimes. So this is one thing. Are they doing this honestly? Or because of the defeat of LTT, the transnational government LTT is there. So what they do, they want to pressurize the new US government, the new US officers, take serious sanctions against them. And even 2015, the resolution 31 came what? 30/1 hybrid court to investigate, to prosecute those who have committed war crimes. And there are certain other things also we missed.
Right.
Certain US senior officers, military officers, General Smith, who came to Sri Lanka to address a defense seminar, he said Sri Lanka forces had not committed any war crimes. So we have not used that opportunity.
Thank you very much.
I mean, lot of evidence there from their side also. Lord Nesby's statement later we can discuss.
Yeah.
But you have to be balanced. You have to be honest and unbiased. Human Rights Commissioner we need in UN. Then only they can see it. If they see it in a biased manner, this problem never solved.
Thank you very much, Professor Attorney at Law Pratibha Mahanam, former Commissioner, Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka. I now move to Ambika Sadgurunathan, former Commissioner, Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka as well. How serious, Ambika, is the situation now at hand? Can we say we won't respect international law, we won't respect the Human Rights Council and withdraw from all this and stay in our own nutshell and say we are glorious and henceforth we won't respect the international conventions or even the Human Rights Council for that matter?
Well, I think firstly the way that we look at it, I would say it's problematic because we are looking at it as if it's something that is targeting us, that is detrimental to the country. I find that is a bit, shows insecurity, and also the purpose of the resolution was to give justice, to help families who have lost their loved ones in the armed conflict to find the truth of what happened. So instead of looking at it as something that is against the country, I feel that the resolution is something that is putting pressure on us to do the right thing. I mean, how can we say that it's a wrong thing to help a mother find out the truth about why her child was disappeared? Why do we say that it's wrong for a wife who handed over her husband at Mullaivaikal to find out the truth about what happened? At the end of the day, it is, we talk about sovereignty. What is sovereignty? It's about the people, right? You have the state not for itself, the state is for its people. So if you have people who are suffering, who haven't had justice, who are still searching for the truth, is it wrong and is it bad to have something to address those concerns? So I think we should not look at it. I mean, even what Jehan said about it's detrimental to the country. Why is it detrimental to the country? In what way? Because what you're doing is you're setting up a system that will help someone find out the truth and bring closure to them. They have lost lives, they have lost their properties, so you give reparations.
But in the government's defense, Ambika, the government can come up with the argument, why must an international body tell us what to do and we can find answers to our own problems?
They can, and I think they have, and all that we can say in response is look at the history. We have a history of commission after commission. Many of those commissions, the reports were not released. Even when the reports were released, the recommendations were not implemented. The first Rajapaksa regime had the LLRC, the recommendations, that was their commission, but they did not implement the recommendations of even their own commission, right? That is something they set up. So therefore, we've had, 30 years or more than 20 years of it, people have lost faith. So it's not about the government. It is at the end of the day about the people. It is about the victims who are searching for the truth, who want justice and reparations.
So let's forget about the 2009-2015 era. Why? Because a lot of people are pointing the finger at the then government, saying that they were not honoring human rights violations during the time of war. Let's look at 2015 after. You were part of the Human Rights Commission as well at that time. What did you all do about it?
Well, we did quite a lot actually, and we were also attacked by the then government at the time, which showed that we were doing a good job. Because we, for instance, submitted a report to the UN Committee Against Torture where we said that torture is systemic, that it is part of our culture, it is embedded. So you do need to bring about changes to the entire criminal justice system, to police, to policing, to all that, right? We have strengthened our officers in the north and the east. So, for instance, even during now, Dr. Mahana Maheva talked about militarization. The army website says that out of 20 divisions of the Sri Lanka army, 16 divisions are in the north and the east. Why? Does anyone have an answer for that? That is called militarization of a certain physical space. So the question is why? Do you feel that you cannot trust the people living in that area, that you need to have, you know, a military person for every 2 civilians? So even militarization, for instance, we did not demilitarize post 2015. So at the commission, we used to still get complaints, and these are all registered at the commission, about surveillance, about intimidation. But the difference was, at that time, the civil society or the human rights defenders would come and complain to us. We would intervene and it would stop. The harassment or surveillance would stop.
Just to wrap up things quite fast, because I need to move to Nilantan as well. Tell me one country in the world which has benefited from the UN Human Rights Council.
Benefited meaning? Benefited
meaning bringing forth resolutions, and it has helped the country to have a forward march in terms of reconciliation, accountability and transparency.
Well, great question you asked. There was I'll go back, 1961, and Ceylon was part of it. It was apartheid, South Africa. That's one of the resolutions we are talking about. Why should should the UN interfere? It was in 1961. Sri Lanka was one of the countries that wrote a letter asking for it. In 1962, it did so again. And it's called Ceylon then. They passed Resolution 1761.
No, but what good has it done?
Well, in South Africa, what it did was that created a whole movement which brought about sanctions, which brought about people stopping diplomatic ties, and that brought an end to apartheid, which then led to truth commissions, which led to a whole other process. So the UN was very much a part of bringing an end to apartheid. It was part of that process.
But even after that, since 1994, South Africa is still reeling from the scars left behind by the apartheid.
Absolutely, and therefore, don't you think it's a great thing that it ended at that time instead of continuing much longer?
But does that mean that Sri Lanka too has to go through the rut for the next few years? We are just 11 years after the end of the conflict in the country, and we're talking about trampling those wounds again and licking the wounds and thinking about the future.
Don't you think, Shamir, that instead, if we sort it out in 11 years, then the wounds won't go deeper and therefore we won't be in a rut? Don't you think, rather than letting it fester for 10, 20, 30 years? I would say the sooner you sort it out, the better.
But 26 years since the end of the apartheid in South Africa. But we are still talking about it.
Exactly. So you made my point.
The Bosnian conflict, Yugoslavia, we are still talking about it.
You made my point for me.
Iraq, we are still talking about it.
Exactly.
Afghanistan, we are still talking about it. Palestine and Israel, we are still talking about it. Kashmir.
Well, Afghanistan is different in terms of military intervention. We're not talking about military intervention
here. But we're talking about human rights across the world.
Yep.
And the mandate of the Human Rights Council, if that's the case, should be across the board.
But it is. Now, for instance, the High Commissioner has issued reports. Now, the US, if you go to the website, there are many reports about arbitrary detention in the US, about the state of prisons in the US. So if we do a little Google search, you can find out all the reports about the US. So it's really, how can we say that they're biased?
Right. So thanks a lot, because that's very subjective. Why? Because many countries in the West are talking about not having capital punishment in the country. But most states in the US have capital punishment.
We can have a whole program on
that. We'll talk about that. That's very subjective, as I said before. So I want to move to Nilantan, defense analyst. Nilantan, interestingly, the US policy on the UNHRC has come to the limelight once again. The US Secretary of State, the new US Secretary of State says that the UNHRC system is flawed. However, it needs reform. But that doesn't mean that we should stay out of it. What do you gather from this statement?
So what I gather is that there's clearly an ongoing conversation in American politics now on what their role should be in engaging with the world. I think it's while they might try to, yes, they could join, as you were pointing out earlier, they could join the council again, but all it would take is another reactionary populist candidate to come to power for all that to be undone. So this is a larger conversation in US domestic politics on what, because there's a huge chunk who feel that US foreign policy has been a bit too proactive and not really taking care of American economic interests for a long time. And then there's another vote bank, so to speak, who seems to feel that the US needs to go back to global leadership and to go back to playing a proactive role in many of these outfits. So I don't see this as being the end of that conversation. This is going to be an ongoing conversation. We're probably going to have to be ready for the fact that there will be other presidents who come in the future who withdraw from international obligations even more.
So Nilanjan, if the US did it once, why can't Sri Lanka do it now?
So, I mean, we can, as it was stated already, we are not signatories to the Rome Statute anyway. So in terms of, yes, there can be individual countries that choose to take action against this, but without the 5 permanent members on board, it would be very difficult to exercise a lot of power even under universal jurisdiction, because ultimately the international system is created in a way to funnel all the decision-making power to these 5 states, right? I mean, you could say the winners of the Second World War, the creators of the world order we live in, whatever, right? But it's the international system is set up specifically. This is the purpose. And this is why most of these things don't work. And a lot of people scratch their heads and wonder why it didn't work, because they feel that the intention was genuine and things like that. But,
but the question is, Blandan, if the US did it to withdraw from the UN Human Rights Council, why can't Sri Lanka withdraw?
As in, we can, but it wouldn't make a difference. Our membership, right, as part of the UNHRC in this context does not really make a difference.
Is it because Sri Lanka is dependent on the international community in terms of FDIs? Dr. Jahan spoke about GSP Plus. We saw the way in which Sri Lankan fisheries exports came to a complete standstill as a result of human rights violations. Is it because Sri Lanka is dependent on the international community that we can't take a stand on where we position ourselves internationally?
I mean, no more than any other country of our geographic or economic size. If anything, if you look at countries that are of comparable political and economic power to us, I would say that we have taken up against the international community far more frequently than many of our contemporaries when you look at geopolitics. So I don't think it's a question of us needing them. But I mean, certainly we need them. Certainly all countries need to be a part of an international community.
No, but it doesn't seem like that, because we saw last week President Gotabaya Rajapaksa meeting the movers of the resolution as well, Canada, Germany as well. So that means that even at the presidential level, he is concerned about the UN resolution.
I mean, but you have to be concerned about the UN resolution.
So
you're
why
the head
didn't it
of
happen?
state, you're the
Why
president,
didn't it happen?
You have to meet with the.
Why didn't it happen at foreign ministerial level? Why must it happen at a presidential level to discuss about a UN resolution?
Because this is something that's central to the national security of the country. It's something that's central to the direction that the country heads in.
So if it is so central, if it's so central about the country's security, if it's central about attracting investments to the country, let's be serious about what we're talking about.
I mean, let's be serious. Let's be serious about the fact that if he had not met them, if he had not met them, he would have been criticized for not meeting them, right? Look, I'm not a sponsperson for any political party or the government or whatever.
I'm not saying,
but I think we are twisting the narrative here.
To any of the political parties, not the government for that matter. We are having you as an independent defense analyst today on the show, so I want your candid opinions about how you look at things. But the question is, if we are serious about the situation, even at presidential level, breaking protocol to meet an ambassador and discuss about the outcome of a UN resolution, let's be serious about it. Let's not shy away from our responsibility to the international community and have a different face for the people of the country. So what is happening right now is the fact that the government is showing a different face to the masses of the island. and showing a different face to the international community, isn't it?
No, I mean, I don't understand why the president meeting members, prominent members of the international, I don't understand why you see that as a contradiction.
No, at a protocol level. Example, the president will meet someone in the caliber of a president with a cabinet portfolio. The ambassadors do not have a cabinet portfolio when they are assigned to the country. They are working here as diplomats. So if the meetings takes place, the meetings have to happen at protocol level. So they can meet the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who their point of contact is, but there is no need for the president to summon an ambassador to discuss about internal affairs or even external affairs of a country. That's protocol.
Right. I mean, and I suppose I would say the fact that we're having this program shows that this is a big issue, that this is something that affects a lot of us. I don't understand why it would be so controversial for the head of state in a situation at a time like this. I echo the sentiments of all three of my co-panelists when they say that there's a big issue. So the president meeting up with them, I don't really see that as some kind of travesty of justice or a contradiction or anything like that.
But this is not being discussed at political fora at present. The government is not talking about the UNHRC sessions anymore. What they're talking about is a fight with Vimal Veeravansa about the part leadership of the SLPP. They're talking about the cost of living in the country. Where are the important subjects in the country right now? I mean, the UNHRC sessions have to be discussed.
So yeah, I mean, we can certainly have a conversation over whether the politicians are doing a good job. My answer would be no, right? But I really don't see a contradiction in just terms of that actual point. I don't see a contradiction there. In my, once again, my candid opinion, I don't find that to be such a mind-blowing thing that the president met up with...
No, why I'm posing this question to you, Nilandan, is the reason being, in 2015, we co-sponsored a resolution.
Right.
So the government was to stick to the resolution in question and implement the recommendations of the resolution that was co-sponsored by the government. We were at a high peak at that time in terms of accountability, transparency and good governance. Unfortunately, come 2020, there was a change of government, and the fact the then government did not implement the recommendations or parts of the resolution, we're now going in the downhill, right? Is that established?
So in terms of our relationship with the UNHRC, yes,
Absolutely.
it is going downhill.
Okay.
Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely. So then the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dinesh Gunawardena, right after the general election said, we are withdrawing from the UNHRC resolution in question, the 30/1 resolution. We won't be co-sponsors anymore. Now it seems this has not really impacted the UNHRC. It has just been a political statement that has been made by the political authority in the country to please the masses of the island. Whereas in Geneva, action is being taken to file a new resolution with targeted sanctions against individuals in the country. So what has happened in the island is very simple. That has been a farce, absolutely a farce, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's as much a farce as the UNHRC sort of entire process has been. The fact that in 2009-10 they passed a resolution praising the way we conducted ourselves in the war. In 2015, then there's a resolution that says we need to do more. 5 years from now, they might pass a resolution praising us again, and there might be another resolution condemning us. These 47 members of the UNHRC, we need to understand, a third of them change every year. Right? Every year, a third of them go in and a new third come out. The composition is always changing. The consensus, a lot of people, there is no consensus in the UNHRC. That thing keeps changing every year. This is like gathering a bunch of people, asking them what the best color is. They say blue, and then you operate on the assumption that blue is the best color. In 2 years, the entire thing has changed, and they say, oh no, what are you talking about? Blue is terrible. Red is the best color. And now everybody says, yes, red is so, and then you call that justice.
Right.
So it's as much a travesty as the actual international system itself.
Thank you very much. Nilandan, Niruddhan, defense analyst. I open the floor for questions from our journalists. On to my immediate right is Sonali Wanigabadge. On to my immediate left is Jayamal Ratnayake. As on to my far left today is Nadim Majid. But before we start, Sonali, you covered the UNHRC sessions last year. Brief us about what happened and what the system looks like in a nutshell, so our viewers can get a feel of what the situation is. light.
Absolutely, Shamir. It was very interesting to see Sri Lanka's representation in terms of Foreign Minister Dinesh Gunawardena making his address, withdrawing from the previous co-sponsorship of UNHRC Resolution 30/1 last year. However, what was interesting was that the Minister of Foreign Affairs did undertake to continue to engage with the UN and to also specifically retain the Office for Reparations, Office of Missing Persons, and to appoint a commission of inquiry headed by a Supreme Court justice to look into allegations of human rights violations. So it was clear that although the government of the day wanted to take a clear stance saying, look, we are going to be bound by our local mechanisms, our sovereignty, we still would like to engage with the United Nations system. So that was quite interesting, Shamir.
So let's open the floor for questions. Can we start from you, Sonali?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Shamir. My first question is to Nilan. Thanks for being here, first of all. Now, whilst recognizing the importance and significance of a cogent, comprehensive transitional justice mechanism in Sri Lanka, my specific question to you is with respect to the United Kingdom, which is set to present a resolution at the 46th session of the UNHRC on Sri Lanka. Now, incidentally, the ICC has found the UK guilty of crimes against humanity in Iraq, and the UK is currently busying itself formulating the Overseas Operations Bill, which seeks to protect British soldiers and troops from prosecution, which I find is quite hypocritical almost. What are your thoughts on this vis-a-vis its great interest in going against Sri Lanka?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up, because I think that ties into the last point that I was trying to make about how farcical this entire thing is. Mm-hmm. The country that wants to take up the resolution, as you were pointing out, just about 3 months ago, the ICC prosecutor found that they were guilty of systematic war crimes in Iraq, but because sort of they don't have quote-unquote substantive evidence, they cannot move on with the trial, right? And now the United Kingdom, as you pointed out, is working on something called the Overseas Operations Bill, which they are hoping to pass into an act. And what the bill does is it protects British soldiers from precisely the type of prosecution that the end game of this resolution wants to create for Sri Lankan soldiers. So I hope that hypocrisy is not lost on the people watching this program. The fact that on the one hand, the United Kingdom wants to sponsor a resolution that it hopes will lead to prosecution of Sri Lankan soldiers, and concurrently, and the scariest part is, the worst part is, they're doing this in broad daylight. It's not like they're hiding this. They're doing this in broad daylight while they are working on something that will make their own soldiers immune to prosecution of the very same kind, right? So the next time, let's say, the British High Commissioner or anybody sort of expresses concerns about accountability and things like that here, I think you guys in the media should pose the question of what the High Commissioner's take is in terms of their own country's upcoming efforts to protect their own soldiers from and ironically, the report, the UNHRC report, it kind of almost laughs at the Sri Lankan state for saying that there's no substantive evidence against members of the army here, right? They kind of laugh. But this is this exact same argument they made to the International Criminal Court to protect their soldiers. This idea of there being no substantive evidence, right? Which it's almost met with kind of giggles at the moment when someone says it almost in a condescending way, right? But this is what they used to as the legal defense against their own soldiers. So I hope that kind of facade doesn't fool too many people.
Ambika, if I may, sorry, Sonali. The take on the Human Rights Council, it being a flawed system, you know, the system of rotation, as you said, the Human Rights Council can change its mind. Between 2009 and 2014, it changed its mind vis-a-vis how Sri Lanka had conducted the war. I mean, really, at the end of the day, when it comes to international relations, the primary motivator is not universal values, it's real politics, global geopolitics will come, and it's whether or not you have the votes. So the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Human Rights Council are interconnected but two separate bodies. Is this the mechanism through which the Sri Lankan people, let's say victims of human rights offences in Sri Lanka, should anticipate justice, given that the motivation from the beginning itself, it seems to be rotten? Can you expect justice from a rotten system?
Well, the question is, yes, the system is rotten. Yes, there are problems, as Niladhan said. We cannot, disregard all that. That is a fact. But it's also a fact that there are positive aspects to the systems, and sometimes it works and sometimes victims get justice. What we must keep in mind is that the people here have lost faith in the government and they feel they have no redress. So imagine how desperate they are that they look to this dysfunctional system, which is based on realpolitik, as you said, and it depends on who the members are, right? So I think, in a sense, that is how we should view it. They have no options. This is a mechanism. There are things that it could do that could take their quest for justice further. It doesn't mean that they're going to get it immediately. Some of them will not see justice in their lifetime. But justice is also a process, as we have seen in, for instance, the place where the High Commissioner comes from, Latin America, right? She also is a victim of human rights violations, by the way, the current High Commissioner. So that has shown, and South Africa, Yugoslavia, it is not an easy process like democracy. It is ugly, it has, it is dysfunctional, but that is what we have left. So it's the victims are trying to use it to further their quest for justice. It doesn't mean that we will definitely get a resolution or that it will even be implemented.
Do you feel that justice is impossible within the domestic system?
Currently, I would say it does seem so. It does seem that justice is impossible because we have had so few prosecutions of human rights violations. There is Sandhya Ekneligoda, the wife of Prageet Ekneligoda, who has been searching for years, who has been bullied, who has been threatened, who has been harassed. There is Lasantha Vikramatunga's daughter, who has been, trying many means to get justice. And we have seen all these investigations that have gone on for years. We have seen trials that have gone on for years. The only one successful prosecution, which was for the Mirasuvil massacre, where even a child was killed, of Sunil Ratnayaka, we found that the person was given a presidential pardon. So we have a culture of impunity, and it's not just grave human rights violations. Let's take simply like just theft. We have had many complaints at the Human Rights Commission where someone, not from the north or the east, but from the south, someone who is arrested for something like even suspected theft, who is beaten about, who is tortured, a Sinhala man from the south. So what does that show? That shows that our systems are dysfunctional. We need to fix them, and fixing it takes also a long time. And the other factor that we must take into account is that we have had an ethnic conflict. Denial of that is not going to work. We did not have just a terrorist problem, we had an ethnic conflict. And therefore, even our institutions have been politicized and they have been ethnicized. So we do need to enter a process whereby we try to resolve that. If we do it by ourselves, then of course no one is going to interfere. I mean, that is the very simple thing. Why would anyone, even the UN or another country, interfere? It is because people here they're tired. Parents, 70 parents, do you know, in the last few years, 70 fathers and mothers who have been searching for their children have passed away. They have died. Who is going to answer to them? So it's because the people here are putting pressure, and the council...
So maybe that is the strategy. Wait until everyone's passed away and then you don't have to answer to anyone.
Probably that is the strategy of the government. So then what has to be done is that more people just continue fighting.
But Ambika, currently the Ministry of Justice is going through an expedited process of law reform, much needed law reform. We are also looking to the conceptualization, the formulation of a new constitution. So can't we be hopeful? Can't we be stakeholders in this process?
But then, Sonali, how many times have we done that? We had constitutional reform. Now, even during President Mahinda Rajapaksa's time, he had the APRC. They put forward, recommendations. That was not taken forward. Every single government has done this. So how many lifetimes are we going to go through this? And once again, as I say, political will is needed. If we bring about change here, then no one is going to force us to do it. And we should do it. You know why? Because Tamils are also Sri Lankan citizens. Muslims are also citizens. They have a right to demand justice. And although you might have been elected by, 6.9 million people, you're not a president only for them. You're president for the whole country. So I think...
Yeah, but that is not being denied. The president is, of course, the president of all of the peoples of the republic.
But they are denying it, Sonali. I mean, that is the problem, is that you have rhetoric from the government where they say that, A, that we didn't have an ethnic conflict, we only had a terrorist problem. They are saying that this was not an internal armed conflict, it was a humanitarian operation. There are families who are saying that they handed over their loved ones at Mullaivaikal and they cannot find them, but there are no answers. There are people who have been abducted from their homes, no answers. Extrajudicial killings, Prageet Ekneligoda, Lasantha Vikramatunga.
If we were to move away from the semantics of it, with all due respect, and move on to how a consultative, multi-stakeholder process can bring about these changes, these positive reforms that we're talking about. Dr. Jehan Pereira, you have been a staunch ally in enabling, ensuring, furthering human rights. How must we now move forward?
Yeah, I think that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa going and meeting the diplomats, or inviting the diplomats to meet him, I think that was a positive thing. It means the government is taking it very seriously. And I'm hopeful that there will be some accommodation in the process in the coming days, where we can reach some sort of agreement with the international community, because, I mean, Sri Lanka is a part of the world. We are very interdependent on the international community. Our exports, most of our exports go to the Western countries. We want investment in our country. We want the markets of the West. So we can't go headlong in confrontation with them. Also, the problem we are trying to solve is something to do with our own country. We must try and solve that problem. If we reach an accommodation within our country, then the international pressures will evaporate if there is justice within the country. And I mean, I think that within the country, we saw in the last during the last government period how the Tamil parties were very much trying to cooperate with the government. Even now, I'm sure they will cooperate with this government. We all want a solution. We want this to end. And I think this is an opportunity for that. We have a strong government, a government that the majority of people place their confidence in. So the previous government's problem was that the people didn't really have faith in them. They thought that they might betray the country or act in some sort of anti-national way. I think this government, this leadership is trusted by the people. I must also say that I went through this UN the report, and while the individual paragraphs and all, they are true, that's all true what's being said here, but actually the situation is not as bad as it is portrayed. I think Sri Lanka, compared to other developing countries, is better than other developing countries. Most of them, I think that we have more freedom here than in most parts of the world, I think. So we must appreciate that and try and support the government to reach an accommodation with the international
Speaking
community.
of support, recently we saw the P2P peaceful rally in the north. which was organized by the Tamil political parties as well and joined by Muslim political parties as well. Dr. Pratibha Mahanamaheva, we have seen in the past how there were bodies created, for example, the Secretariat for Coordination of Reconciliation Mechanisms, which has since then been disbanded and its tasks abandoned. Why can't we use these lessons from the past, the work, this plethora of work done by different bodies, different organizations in enabling the furtherance of reconciliation? Because something that happens with the passage of and the end of tenure of one government is that all the work goes down the drain. It's important that we collate this work in moving forward. How do you view this? And how do you also view the manner in which Muslim political parties, Tamil political parties, regional political parties should converge with the government so that Sri Lanka can collectively form a united force in combating any tensions?
Before that, I want to raise some issues. People think army has not done anything for the country. They are killers, they are barbarians, they are only abducting people. That's totally wrong. Anyone who come to courts, you must come with clean hands. That's the noble principle. Now the resolutions, tell me any resolution passed against USA. Now there was an argument. The argument said there are reports against US. I mean, has any country come forward passing a resolution against USA? No, this is
No, but Dr. Mahanamaheva,
wait.
The question is not that. No, the question is not that. You're not answering the question.
Give me opportunity, give me opportunity.
If you're not answering the question,
I am answering the question. You can't intervene me, right?
But if you're not answering the question,
give me some time. Otherwise, this is going a wrong direction.
The problem is, Dr. Mahanamaheva, you're going circles and circles and circles.
No, I'll come to this question.
So get to the point.
If some points were there, can't I respond for that?
No,
yes,
you can.
So
sure,
that's my right to answer. That's what I'm telling
First of all, respond.
I will answer that. I will answer that.
And then you can respond.
Wait, I also give me some time. I was waiting for a long time here, right?
Yeah, of course.
So the issue, people will think this is going against the government. I mean, there are certain countries, even UK, the war crimes they have done. Has any country passed any resolution against them? Tell me. No, they are targeting Sri Lanka. The old song, Eknali Godda, those songs are coming. But even 2015 to 2020, they had enough opportunity.
Why are they targeting Sri Lanka?
They are targeting Sri Lanka because Sri Lanka is not listening to them. That's the thing. And also, the backup parties are there. Now I'll answer the question, right? This is where you ask, yes, there must be some cohabitation. Correlation is very important. I think in the parliament, most of the Muslim parties and Tamil parties, what they say, the government, they are implementing certain policies. For that, we should support. I am not criticizing that. I am telling, yes, there must be some effort. For those effort, the ONURA, once again the office has opened. And even President has appointed a Supreme Court judge. And another 3 members are there to go through all the resolutions and propose them. And I heard that UK also trying to, postpone this resolution and give some time for implementation. These are the things we have to do it. Otherwise, there are a lot of innocent army families suffering. Same thing suffering in Jaffna also. I am not telling. So the missing ones, so the missing bodies are there, even Sri Lanka army. And also they have done the best. And those are all certain Sunil Ratnayak. He was a war hero, I am telling, without any problem. Yes. He has done the best thing for his country. As a Sri Lankan, I can defend him because certain other false allegations against him, and that system went in a different way, and that's why these commissions and all found how these politicians have done all these things and how they have institution cases. Everything is there. We have to be balanced, right? I am telling, yes, there are certain missing people.
But do you agree?
I
but do you agree?
I am telling we have to be biased. We have to be biased.
No, but do you agree?
You just see the army has not done anything. How many times army gave blood for these innocent people? How many army people has construction the bridges? How many army has done the houses for them?
But
you have to see that too.
But no one in the panel said that the army has not done anything.
No. The direction is going that way. That is my feeling. I may be wrong, right?
Yeah.
But independent
but
person
do you agree?
looking,
But do you agree
we have
that
to see
there
both
needs to be
sides.
closure? Do you agree?
Both sides.
No, but do you agree there needs to be closure for those who have lost their loved ones?
I agree. Not only north and east, but it is happening south also. 88, 89. That period also. And how many missing people are there still? 60,000 massacred by that government. But still people are suffering with that. And also, I am telling, yes, we must come for a consensus. That I totally agree. But both parties must come for a reconciliation. I agree with LLRC, yes. Paranagama Commission is there. But they have not implemented that. That is something.
So I was trying to say that we have to come to a consensus with the international community to address the problems.
I mean, a best institution, Commonwealth Human Rights Center. They are training human rights commissions. They are training human rights activities. With their support, we can set up a national human rights action plan. That's my argument. Even government change, you should not change that. What's happening in Sri Lanka, time to time government coming into power and then they change their pattern and once again they go with their system. No, we must have a strong policy. I am agree for a national inquiry. We must have a proper national inquiry.
But even the LLRC recommendations were not implemented, Professor.
That's why my argument, I am not going to defend these things, but I am putting the arguments in a very balanced manner. A local mechanism. They can train us.
So Dr. Jahan, the problem right now is, let's look at the LLRC recommendation report that was issued. One of the recommendations in the LLRC report says that they should hold responsible Karuna Amman for killing innocent police officers in the eastern province. But the government has not implemented that recommendation. So how can you expect the LLRC report to be fully implemented by the government?
Yes.
Now what the government is doing is cherry picking whatever they want and whatever they disregard, and coming to a conclusion about what they want to implement and what they don't want to implement. Now that's not fair. That's not giving closure to the Tamil people in the country. That's not even giving closure to the single people in the country as well, the single Buddhist majority.
See, I think that our discussion and in fact the whole idea of the UN resolutions and transitional justice is very heavily skewed to the issue of accountability. The accountability and punishment and who did wrong and violations. But actually the resolution and transitional justice is much more than that. It is also about compensating victims, reparations and institutional reform, to change the way we are governed, to change our institutions so that this will never happen again. You know, the Tamil people, the Muslim people are also suffering not because they lost people in the war, but because they have suffered discrimination, or their priorities are not being taken into account. You know, I was just looking at this P2P, the P2P protest, right? They are not asking in this for punishment of soldiers. They are not asking at all. They are saying our lands are being taken away. On our lands where there are Hindu temples, there are Buddhist, it is said that there are ancient Buddhist sites and then it becomes a Buddhist area. Our land is where cattle farmers are grazing their cattle, that is being taken away and given to companies or to Sinhalese. The Muslims being, you know, the issue of the cremation, that they should be buried because it is their right. You know, and of course then the families of the disappeared, of the missing, that they should find out what happened to their loved ones. So, you know, but we are talking all the time about this issue of war crimes, the soldiers, but I think it is not that. We should not get trapped in this, you know, and if we reform our polity, if we address the roots of our problem, the problem of why this war came about in the first place, That is the solution.
So, Nandan, interestingly, we're speaking about the forced cremation issue as well. I just want to drag your attention to the statement that was made by Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa in Parliament, responding to a question that was made by S.M. Marika, who is the Samagajana Balavegia parliamentarian. The Prime Minister says that cremation burials would be allowed. However, days after, now we hear that an expert committee attached to the Health Ministry has to decide about the burial issue in the country now. So how can even the international community have some faith with this government which is in power right now?
So if I'm not mistaken, the Health Ministry's laid out 7 guidelines or something like that that you need to adhere to. So on the point of your question, yes, sort of my only point would be from the international community's perspective. The problem here is that these these COVID laws are now being projected as an attempt to target one singular community, which is not really true. I mean, it's not like Hindus and Buddhists just take the body and throw it into a fire and walk away. We all have religious rites, we all have rituals at the end. And I would say many religions, many communities have been affected by the anti-COVID laws that surround death and the funeral service and things like that. So my only point, because I look at the international media and I look at what the international community's coverage of this is, including the UNHRC report, there seems to be this widespread attempt to sort of now shape this as a move to deliberately target one community.
Because we know that the Saudi government even rejected Sri Lanka's ambassador to Riyadh a couple of weeks ago because of the forced cremation that is taking place in the island.
Yeah.
So we are distancing ourselves right now from even the Muslim world, Muslim nations, which were once very close to Sri Lanka.
Yeah, but we can't really control how the Muslim nations choose to perceive this. The only thing I'm trying to get across is that, because you asked me about the international community.
But Nilanjan, how should it be perceived if it's not discriminatory law?
As in, if you want to have a debate on the scientific sort of data on whether this is necessary or not, I think that should be welcome.
I think that, isn't it more accurate to say that it was basically a botched cover-up where they are unwilling to back down? Because there was a cremation that had happened before the Gazette was issued. The Gazette came after the cremation had happened. They didn't want to admit that a mistake was, I'm just hypothetically, they didn't want to admit a mistake was made, so they issued a Gazette, and then they're just refusing to back down now.
But that really has nothing to do with
the scientific evidence doesn't, I mean, the scientific evidence is that has been provided for forced cremations is basically quack, right? Because what do you do with all the hospital waste then?
I mean, I think we're speaking at cross purposes here, because I don't really think that was the point that I was making anyway. The point that I was making is that the overall sort of spectrum of laws that we currently have, right, in order to curb, right, an ongoing pandemic or whatever. Because remember, if these weren't implemented, trust me, many of the same people would
But don't you think the reason they bring it up is because it's an indicator as to the bona fides of this government, of this administration, the current administration, is whether the willingness to admit that a mistake was made and to then rectify it, to remedy it. Maybe you're right in saying that it was not like maliciously intended at harming one community, but the continuity of this policy of forced cremations gives weight to that perception that it is maliciously targeting one community.
But why do you keep characterizing the anti-COVID laws as just this one thing? So I'm a Hindu, right? So does this mean that I am not being affected by the laws that are being
Of course, everyone is being affected.
And that's my point, right? But if you look at the coverage of this, issue, it's being, you can read human rights watch,
the point.
Read all the reports that have been
Nilanjan,
coming
it's exactly the point that I'm making. I mean, if the law, let's say the law impacts everyone because no one's able to have their final rights the way that they would like to have it if they are COVID positive. But the law itself is founded on poor, you can't even dignify it by calling it science. It's based on quackery. the law is founded on quackery, and therefore it is an unjust law. Unjust to everyone. Why is it continuing?
Yeah,
I mean, the people know it, everyone knows it. Why is it continuing?
Yeah. So I was about to answer this question at the very beginning, but then you cut me off, right?
I mean, the continuity of that law indicates that there is mala fides on the part of the government.
So there would be a mala fide intent on the part of the government if this continuing thing, if they said, look, Muslims cannot be cremated, right? If there was a law that said Muslims cannot be cremated,
I'm not saying
everyone else can do whatever they want.
Not mala
That
fides
would
towards
be
the Muslims, mala
targeting a
fides
single
towards the Sri
community.
Lankan people.
Sorry?
Not mala fides towards the Muslims, mala fides towards the Sri Lankan people.
I mean, there's a pandemic that's going on, so yes, we can have a conversation over what rights should be restricted and what rights shouldn't, right? I'm not, once again, I don't understand why this is being kind of treated as me kind of making a point that I wasn't. The only point that I was making is that this cannot be construed as it is currently being construed as some kind of policy to just go after one particular group. That's just not the case. We could of course have a debate on the scientific veracity of this.
No,
Is just based on bunk,
okay,
or is there credible evidence? That conversation is welcome, and we should have that. But this other misrepresentation of the situation, right, it exacerbates our current problem.
Let's say I agree that the situation is misrepresented, that there is no secret force that is trying to go after one community, or there is no, let's just say that that's all bunker, right? Let's say that that's all bunker. My question is, you have this law which you know is based on quackery,
and
yet
on?
quackery.
Okay.
It's not science. It's not science that this, because if that was the case, you can't be letting out all of your hospital waste either. Right? I mean, it's simple. So given that is the case, why the fact that the government is unwilling, has been now for close to a year, unwilling to dial back on this policy and say, look, this was an initial measure that we took because we didn't know what the extent of this pandemic was. We felt that it was necessary, but now we feel easy. Why has the government, in the face of evidence, global best practices and the guidelines that are available, I mean, the fact that the government is not willing to dial this back indicates either, what does it indicate?
Yeah, so you're the one who built it up. So what does it? You seem.
I
to
mean,
be
it
building
indicates
up to something,
mala
but you leave
fides.
it open.
It indicates misgovernance.
Sure, and once again, and we can have a conversation over that. So I am not sort of against science. I'm not saying that, right? I think the point that I was making got picked up on, and the conversation kind of.
So I'll ask a very easy question for you.
Please.
So there is no misconception in terms of what Nadeem wants to tell you. So you are representing the minority in the country. Am I right?
I mean, in the sense that I'm a Tamil, yes, but I consider myself a Sri Lankan, so
Right,
I
okay.
don't
Right.
sort of, yeah.
Do you think that there needs to be closure for the minority Tamils in the island?
So,
Whether
yes,
it is the UNHRC or whether it's the Sri Lankan government that is going to give them, that is a different question altogether.
yes.
But do you agree that the Tamil-speaking people in the north and east who are affected by the war of the island nation needs closure?
I would certainly say yes, right? But the problem is we are not a monolithic community where we are all sort of angsty for closure, right? There are some people who feel that there has been closure, that we need to move on, and there are some voices who say that there is still a lot
Ambika Ma probably will be among that minority.
But I think that's a good thing, that there's a diversity of
who
views.
needs closure for the Tamil-speaking people in the island.
I don't think you can say it's a minority.
Okay. So, but there is there is a significant amount of people in Sri Lanka probably who needs closure, but that is very subjective. But
because I work with the communities, and that's the thing, because my experience comes not from just theory or books. I actually work with communities. For 5 years, when I was at the commission, I oversaw all the offices in the north and the east, so I actually dealt with victims, with people, even before that, even with the Muslim burial, right? I have colleagues and friends who work with the families. So to me, human rights violation is not about just law. It is about human beings. It is about their suffering, their loss, their need for truth, for closure. Same thing, I mean, about the burial. It's all about, and Jehan mentioned accountability, but it is about being held accountable, because the role of a citizen in a democracy, if we can all agree, can we agree with this is a democracy? If it is a democracy, the role of a citizen actually duty is to hold the state accountable. They serve us, right? That's the thing. So even, I'm saying even in relation to simple public policy to do with electricity or water or whatever it might be, to hold them accountable. Human rights violations, definitely. Why do we look at accountability as a bad thing? And also about the law, the burial, where laws are concerned.
No, but the argument is, Ambika, from the majority of the people, as we just heard what Professor Mahana Mehva said as well. It's been nearly 12 years now, 11 years now, following the end of the conflict. Why are we revisiting the past?
But for some people, the past never ended. It is still the present. That's why we're quote-unquote revisiting the past. If you actually deal with it, then it can become the past for them. You're not allowing it to become the past because you do not deal with it.
But we are not letting the wounds heal.
But the wounds, how can they heal if a person still... I spoke with a woman 2 days ago. She lost her husband in 2008.
I'm you need to take full responsibility for the statement that you're making, because
absolutely,
we can independently verify whatever you're saying.
That's fine, absolutely, no problem, all my life. 2008, she lost her husband. She also lost her father-in-law, her brother-in-law, all because of the war. Her husband was disappeared. He was abducted from their home with men wearing uniform with guns. She actually saw them. Since 2008 to now, she's still searching for them. She has 3 kids, 19, 20, 21, and they all engage in manual labor. She could not educate them. She married the daughter of Young. Now people call these people, that they're getting funded by the diaspora. Believe me, if she was getting funded by the diaspora, she wouldn't be selling vegetables. Her children would have gone to school and she wouldn't have married her daughter.
Right, that's one story. That's one story.
What I'm saying is there are thousands of stories like that.
Let's talk, okay, there are thousands of stories. Let's talk about what happened in Colombo following a bomb blast. Maybe the central bank bomb, maybe the capital level bomb, where most of the innocent soldiers were killed as a result of
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes.
Why aren't we talking about these people?
No one has said that because those were also
right now the focus of the UNHRC is about the people in the northern east.
Well, I'm very glad you raised those issues, because we also have an issue of 600 Sri Lankan policemen being killed in the east. And the person who is allegedly responsible for that is part of this government. So if you're talking about accountability, well, the person is right there. He's part of the government. So why isn't the government holding a person who is allegedly responsible for killing 600 Sri Lankan policemen? And there are people in the government.
The argument could be he is now rehabilitated. Now so he's in the system.
No, it's not rehabilitated. I think this someone in the government actually said several times. I can't remember who, but if you want, I can during the break find it for you. Is that it is because they supported us. So basically, our notion of right, wrong, law, justice is about who supports us and who doesn't. So if you support us, then you can kill as many policemen as you want and get away with it. But if you don't, well, God help you.
Ambika, you raised that issue and also spoke about the South African example, where again accountability took a back seat, accountability quote unquote, and it was more driven towards peace and reconciliation among warring factions. So couldn't it have been that? I mean, under the textbook definition of transitional justice, which encompasses truth, justice, reparations, non-recurrence, where you go in for something like the TRC in South Africa, and justice took a backseat, as it were?
Well, several differences. First, that it was a negotiated kind of change of power. It was negotiated.
Yeah, different structures,
right?
different
And
formats.
so then also, if
Yeah.
it's an armed conflict, it comes to an end. All that changes the context. No, it does. So that was that. And the second thing is, yes, it was, but even giving amnesty there was not just a blanket amnesty. You had to go before a panel. I'm sure you know. You had to go before a panel. You had to say what you had done, and then the person was also there, the victim, etc., and they had to agree. And so even now, if you look at research that was done with the victims afterwards, now so many years later, and there's plenty, is that many of them feel that they were coerced by the process, or that they feel that they didn't get justice. There is still a lot of angst there. And the reason that I think they also have not been able to deal with the core problem, right, which is discrimination and marginalization.
But Sonali makes a good point, right? The reason is most of those who were involved in discriminating the people in South Africa found a safe haven in the West, in the United Kingdom, for an example. People found a safe haven in the US, as an example.
Well,
they were
discrimination
not
yeah.
prosecuted in South Africa.
Discrimination is different to war crimes or human rights, grave human rights violations, etc. So if you're looking at, for instance...
So if you're talking about hypocrisy...
No. I think you're confusing the two.
Itself.
Shamir, you're confusing the two, because discrimination is very different. Now, if you talk about, for instance, the Holocaust, right? Israel is even now searching for people, and even recently I think they found someone and they put them on trial, and the whole concept of universal jurisdiction came about then at the Nuremberg trials. And universal jurisdiction goes back even further, because it starts with the pirates, who were thought to be enemies of humanity, and the purpose of universal jurisdiction was to ensure that these pirates wouldn't get safe haven anywhere. That is the concept, and it started from the Holocaust, from the Nuremberg trials, and Israel has shown how they've, gone in a way hunting these people decades later.
Ambika, the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, Sri Lanka needs to collectively find a homegrown solution to deal with this situation. How must we do it?
Well, I think, firstly, I think we do need to acknowledge that we had an ethnic conflict. That we do need to, and we do need to acknowledge that there is still discrimination, that there is still marginalization. Now, you said that it was not in dispute that the president is the president of all people, but just on the 4th of February at the Independence Day, he made a statement saying, I am a Sinhala Buddhist president, and it was reported all over the media. I think maybe y'all did too. Is that and I rule by Buddhist precepts. Now, if you have a country where you have other religions, other ethnicities, and we've had an ethnic conflict, and people are already mistrustful of the state, making such a statement is only going to make them more insecure, because the role of a government and the president is to ensure that your citizens feel secure. And that's why even the burial issue is that you can bring about any law, but when you find that the law discriminates against a particular community, as a government, it is your duty to change that, to ensure that those citizens are not discriminated against.
So, Dr. Mahanamaheva, how do you view these comments by Ms. Sapunanathan?
Now, most of the arguments are in the report. Whatever the arguments up to now we got, it is in this report.
Yeah, how do we combat these arguments?
Or anyone, I don't know. Now I have a suspicion who prepared this. All the arguments which are there, but not talking anything about innocent civilians killed by these terrorists. Give me 2 minutes. Innocent civilians, how they killed those who are in church, those who are in hospitals. These terrorists, no one is talking. I mean, that also wrong. If army had done something wrong, because we have to take action. So, my argument, we will forget all these things. And if we are talking about ones and ones, that is the West requirement. Go on this. Keep Sri Lanka in a trouble position. My argument is this. Certain recommendations are there. Yes, we can positively see this recommendation. Now, for example, TRC. I agree for that. Truth and Reconciliation Commission. If honestly, then both parties can see and how it happened. Now, if we are going to Nuremberg trials and all these things, now it's the present. So in present, are we taking this report once again for a so long period?
No, but the
Oh,
argument
yeah, I agree. There are discrimination in South also. Not in East, not in North, South also. There are a lot of discrimination. So we must come to one platform rather than fighting near the Geneva period. Any issue, why can't we come up for a platform as you say? So I have some recommendation. This is where National Human Rights Action Plan or a local domestic national inquiry or a truth and record commission or a torture commission. So those are some possible things we can all come and contribute. For that, I am totally submitted.
Now the LLRC report was submitted and was tabled.
Yeah.
In one of the recommendations, it very clearly states, as Ambika correctly pointed out, and I mentioned before as well, about the 600 police personnel who were killed. Now, the person who was responsible is now holding hands with the government. So the government can take action now. Professor, why isn't the government taking action?
My argument is this. If that is proved,
no, this is the recommendation of the LLRC report. I'm not
Okay.
saying it.
LLRC report.
After years of deliberations,
Right,
the
it is there, it
LLRC
is there.
report clearly highlights that fact.
I saw it. Point 12, it is there.
Yeah.
LLRC report. And not only that, there are several other incidents there.
Yeah.
So LLRC report, chapter 5, it already gives certain
If the government
recommendations.
is honest about
Yeah,
its
yeah, yeah.
approach, take
I
action
agree.
on the LLRC report which was submitted during the Mahinda Rajapaksa government's era.
Definitely. These commissioners were appointed at that time.
No, these
And
commissioners were
former
appointed after
Attorney General was there.
2015. No,
I
don't get
mean,
that wrong.
they
You were
had the
appointed- you were in
opportunity.
the commission, Professor, during Mahinda Rajapaksa's time in the UNHRC.
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah,
I
but
was there from
no, they were not.
2012 to 2015.
No, yeah,
we were trying to do other things also because we were trained by Commonwealth Human Rights Commission and we went to Geneva for several times and we were also making proposals. But you can see some of my articles at that time I published. So I don't know whether it is accepted or not. But the thing is very clear. If someone has done something wrong, yes, clearly you have to punish. There are no two words about that. So other than that,
So who should be held responsible? Is it Piliano, Karunamman who should be held responsible?
I am not a judge to
for killing
punish a
600?
person. I
In
am
your
not a
opinion,
judge.
as a
No, I
former
can't say
Human
that.
Rights Commission, now let's say
Yeah.
you are probing something,
we
so
can
you
never,
have to
we
give
can
a
never,
recommendation.
we can conduct an investigation.
Yeah, so once
after
the
the
investigation is
investigation,
conducted by the LLRC Commission, what do you think must be the suitable action against individuals of that caliber?
my
No
argument,
substantive evidence.
if that commission having credible evidence and you can prosecute them, that's all. That's my argument. If it is not done, is that my fault? I can only tell my opinion.
It's the fault of the state. It's the fault of the government, and that is what Ambika and Jehan
No,
are
I
saying.
don't.
It's the fault of the government.
I
in
don't
power.
think failures are there. So the only failure government is Sri Lanka, not in Sudan, and not in Hong Kong. So there are 193 countries, the lowest and the failure country. That is also wrong. There are other countries you can take. Ethiopia, 58,000 killed, and several other countries I can give. Yemen, more than 600,000. So where are the action? So don't talk only Sri Lanka. Put all the countries together and take it. This
But that
is
is
where
why-
the agenda of the West.
That
This
is
is where
why-
the agenda
that
of the
is
West
why,
coming for the
Professor,
geopolitical,
That
country.
is why, Professor, right at the start, I was trying to set the stage to ask Nilandan as well as you, can we do without the UNHRC? Can we walk away from
We
it?
can.
But we are not doing it.
But we have signed, ratified all these international conventions. Therefore, sometimes ago I heard they want to withdraw from the UNHRC, but they think they want to go with that. My personal opinion, we can set up our own system. That's my personal opinion. So I can't talk on behalf of a government.
Dr. Jahan, now interestingly, we're talking about issues in other countries. Yemen, the loss of lives. We know that the Saudi government at present is on a rampage, bombing most of the locations in Sana'a, in the Yemeni capital. Then we're talking about what happened in Iraq, where a soldier went ahead and sprayed at thousands of civilians And as a result of that, he was brought back to the US and he's being prosecuted there, not in Iraq. However, Saddam Hussein was being prosecuted in US, in Iraqi territory, and we didn't even know that he was being hanged to death. Only in the morning we knew that one-time president of Iraq is being hanged to death through a CNN report or live coverage at that time. So, isn't there bias decisions being taken by the UNHRC as well when it comes to developing nations as well as developed nations? We see a big disparity, isn't it?
I think the question is, why is Sri Lanka being targeted? No? I think maybe one reason is the Sri Lankan conflict has been very internationalized. We have, our people have gone to Western countries. During our war, we got assistance from a lot of foreign countries. Also, you know, Sri Lanka has always been a special country in the world. You know, it's not only in the negative sense. In the 70s, I mean, in the 60s, we were the country that came up, produced the first woman prime minister. The world got to know about us. In the 70s, we headed the non-aligned nation. We chaired the non-aligned conference. In the 70s, we were a special country in terms of the quality of life we gave our people. So we are a special country in that sense. I think the world expects more from us. That's one reason. They expect more from us. And they think that what happens in Sri Lanka is also studied by other countries. I mean, I heard from one...
Dr. Jha, yeah. just to say about the woman prime minister, Sri Lanka appointed elected the first woman prime minister in the 1970s. However, let's look at the parliament now. Look at the women representation parliament now. You're talking about the non-aligned movement and how Sri Lanka chaired it. Look at Sri Lanka now, not having a non-aligned policy at all in its foreign policy. We have gone back, so we are not special anymore in the eyes of the international community, that's for sure. This is just a notion that is being brought forward saying we had the first woman prime minister, we were the non-aligned, we brought in the non-aligned concept, we were the founding members of the non-aligned movement in the country, so on and so, in the world, so on and so forth. So all these notions are now swept under the carpet. We're not discussing about those anymore, are we?
Yeah,
we've taken a lot of steps back.
No, I think the world actually sees that we can do much better than we are doing. And I also just want to make another point.
So if the world thinks that we should do better, give us grants, give us foreign direct investments, help Sri Lanka to come out of this economic crisis, debt burden. Everything is tied onto something. Let's take a look at India for an example. Trying so hard to get the west or the eastern container terminal at present. Look at China. We have already given three islands to China to develop power plants. What are we talking about?
Well, I mean, but as for why the world got so involved, they were involved in our war also. You know? During our war, we got assistance from the international community. And that is also partly why we won the war against the LTT, because we got arms from them, we got information, intelligence. They banned the LTT. So they also helped us to try and solve this. So they feel a sense of responsibility perhaps, but also maybe there's hypocrisy and big power politics in this. But I want to just one point. Yeah. You know, I just looked at the recommendations of the UN High Commissioner. 11 recommendations. Only one of those 11 is about this accountability, about punishment. The other 10 are not about that. The other 10 are about, for the first recommendation they give is to promote an inclusive, pluralistic vision of Sri Lanka based on non-discrimination, protection of the human rights of all. So, you know, and you asked about closure for the Tamil people, for the minorities. I mean, closure, I think there are two aspects to that closure. One is, of course, what happened during the war. That there are many people who suffered a lot and they need closure. But I think all the minorities, all the Tamils, they also want closure to that ethnic conflict, to the issue which gave rise to the war. the fact that they feel that in this country they can't contribute as much as they should, or that they are entitled to the decisions that are made. In other words, the system, a fair system of power sharing of power, where it's not simply the ethnic majority that takes the decisions, but also the representatives of the ethnic minorities share in that decision making. Now, that's what we have not been able to, the solution we have not been able to find for the last 70 years.
Nilan, is this the platform, is the UN Human Rights Council the place where we should be seeking, whether through a resolution or this thing, the result that Dr. Pereira is talking about? I mean, we do need it. There's probably no denying that there is a need for a certain degree of systemic and institutional reform within the country to ensure better governance, better delivery of public services. But given what you mentioned in your opening remarks, that the Human Rights Council is a deeply flawed system, can we expect to have something that a resolution of which Sri Lanka is not a part, where there is no consensus, can we expect that to provide the results that we're talking about?
So, I think as you could have guessed by now, my answer would be no. I don't consider this to be, at least the way it's set up is so as you're saying, I agree that it would be nice if we had something which oversaw many of these things and that did a good job, right? I don't want sort of, I'm actually in agreement with what's been said on the other side in terms of we need to have a conversation on many different things. My only concern is that the international system that we see today is, it's quite outdated and it's a shambles, to be quite honest. I mean, just the fact that the two parties that raised the resolution against this in 2015 are now no longer a part of that. Of course, this doesn't sort of change the fact that other people can act on it. And as I was saying, the fact that the new resolution is now being sponsored by people who have already been found guilty of crimes by the ICC. And look at the other member states, right? The UNHRC's members are kind of stalwart defenders of human rights, such as Somalia, Ethiopia, right? And if North Korea had a seat in the General Assembly, North Korea would have served as part of the UNHRC by now. So this is the major problem. When you are accused, if I go on trial tomorrow or you go on trial tomorrow, we have the right to a credible, qualified judge. Which is why the judicial process is so complex, which is why judicial selection is such a meticulously planned out one, because every person who is accused of something has the right to a credible judge. And in this case, when you look at the way that it's set up, I don't see how the Sudans and the Rwandas and someone mentioned Saudi Arabia. I mean, that's a country that is actually committing mass murder in Yemen against the Houthi rebels. So I don't see how that kind of all adds up to any sort of valid conception of a human rights mechanism that can work. This is not a credible human. I wish there was a system. Yeah.
But Nilandan, do you know how the UNHRC system works? Do you know how it works?
So, do you mean in terms of the structure?
In terms of structure.
Yeah, so there are 47 member states and a third of them always, sort of every year, a third leave and a new third comes in. And then they,
so whether they have committed war crimes or whether they have been engaged in other notorious activity doesn't matter. Because when the rotation comes into play, they come into the system and they're out of the system after a period of time. So that is not something that is in the control of the UNHRC.
But which wouldn't be acceptable in any kind of justice system in any other context. This whole idea of just people changing every year and a new person, there's a reason why there are contradictions in their own position. There's
and
a reason why they praise this one.
That is why the Commissioner of Human Rights is an independent person handling the affairs and taking independent decisions on the affairs of the world.
But the Commissioner is not going to be the one voting on it. It's going to be the 47 member countries that shuffles around who votes.
And that is why resolutions are being brought into play. In 2009, most of the countries or most of the people of the opinion in Sri Lanka that Sri Lanka won the UN resolution at that time because we were good. That wasn't the case. At that time, in 2009, 2010, when Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka was in Geneva, how the system worked was, we had countries which were favoring us.
Yes.
in that 47 member states. As a result of that, they voted in favor of Sri
Yes.
Lanka. Not that they wanted to vote. There was individuals or there were countries that were voting against the country at that time. They were in favor of Sri Lanka.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I made that quite clear with my blue
so
and
right
red
now,
analogy.
right now, the
Milan, when you look
47
at
member
the-
states
when you look at the
have
47
consist of individuals who are in the Islamic world. Most of them are from Pakistan, from Bahrain. So we have some countries from the Muslim world. Right now, we cannot even go to the Muslim world and ask for help because of this forced cremation issue that is taking place in the island. So we are right now in a deadlock. We don't know what to do. We just heard the Prime Minister saying about the burials and no concrete action being taken. We know that the Pakistani Prime Minister, who is due in the island on the 22nd, on the same day, the UNHRC sessions are starting, congratulating the Prime Minister and commending his efforts to bring about the burials to play. But what's happening?
Okay, so I was simply answering the question of whether the UNHRC is the
No,
right
but
mechanism
I
for
want to
this.
know whether you know the system, because without knowing how the system works, you cannot comment on.
No, so
how
what
the
makes you
countries
think
are
I
coming
don't know
into
how
play.
the system works? I'll tell you how it works. There are 13 countries from Asia,
Yeah.
there are 13 countries from Africa, right? There are about 7 to 8 from the Americas and
No,
about
because you
7
spoke
to 8
about
from
Rwanda
Europe.
coming into play, but Rwanda is not coming into play just because they want to be in the system. They're coming into play because of the rotation that is taking place.
Yes, which was my critique of the system,
Yeah.
that this idea of a rotational roster is not compatible with the idea of justice. That was my point, which is why I made the blue and the red analogy of it just constantly changing all the time. At one moment, the combination of those 47 members can be pro-Sri Lanka. Another moment, that combination can be anti. So I was simply answering his question of whether I felt it was a credible human rights mechanism or not.
Nilan, when you look at the current composition of the Human Rights Council, as you correctly mentioned, the 13 African states, 8 Latin
That's
American
always the
and
composition.
8 Latin American Caribbean, 13
System.
Asia Pacific, 7 Western Europe and 6 Eastern Europe. When you look at, I mean, not just the regional composition, but the current member states, do you think it's likely or unlikely that a resolution which does not have Sri Lanka's support will pass?
So to be honest, I don't really know what the Eritreas and the Congos of the world are going to do. To be honest, I have no expertise in that regard. I hope that through a mix of diplomacy, at least when the sessions start through the General Assembly, I hope that there will be a consolidation of support. But it's only once the sessions start that I think we can start making meaningful reviews of how the things are going. Once it starts, I will be able to give you a much better answer.
So Jamal,
Yes.
Professor Mahanam, talking about the forced cremation issue and the sort of flag we have drawn from the international community, especially the predominant Muslim nations. Now, when the Prime Minister announced that cremations will be allowed, burials will be allowed, the Prime Minister of Pakistan was one of the first responders, and he commended the Prime Minister's announcement. However, since then, the Gazette has not been rescinded, and now we risk losing the support of predominant Muslim nations, including Pakistan, the support of those nations when it comes to the UNHRC sessions. And we know that the UNHRC sessions that are on the horizon are going to be a tough one. Why do you think the government is still carrying on with its policy, given that it has been backed by scientific evidence, and knowing fully well that losing the support is also another option or another circumstance? Why do you think the government is still carrying on with this process?
I don't think the Gulf region countries may not support us. I read a report today, I don't know how far it is correct, IOC countries backing Sri Lanka. And also, I can remember even 2014, Pakistan came up with a resolution to postpone resolution against Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka got 17 and they got 27 or 28. So we lost. Most of the time, at this moment, China, Russia, this is world politics. Give me 2 minutes, I'll explain. In the Myanmar issue, when the Security Council meeting happening, what happened? They want to issue a combined statement. USA was pressurizing for a combined statement. But Russia and China say no. They are not agree. They give some time. So this is where I have seen on my own eyes in 2013, 2014, who is doing the lobby work. On behalf of Sri Lanka, China, Russia, Vietnam. Even Vietnam vote was a doubt. So USA, this is a lobby work. This is like election. So they go and, pressurize them. But even Vietnam vote will go. But India, as well as South Africa, they were silent. India one time supporting us, 2 times against us, and abstain. So I don't know the situation. But still I believe there is a trend. Forget about this burial issue and other things, and see how the world politics are playing. Even if the Prime Minister give a pledge, yes, you have to implement that, but there are certain health regulations also you have to see. This is where a government policy or a government decision. But based on that isolation, now my only problem, why the UNHRC Human Rights Commissioner was a politician. He was 2 times president of Chile, right? That is a known fact. All right. Maybe his rights also, her right also violated, but finally she got her right. And she must be, okay, rather than Pakistan Prime Minister, I am very happy if government can invite Honorable Michelle Bachelet to come Sri Lanka and visit. It same happened when we were in the Human Rights Commission. Dr. Navanidan Pillai visited. After visiting the whole island as several places, she made a beautiful statement how Sri Lanka has to be protected. So she may have not seen these things. So rather than any other one, I encourage the government.
However, Ms. Navanidan Pillai was insulted by a then prominent member of the government, Dr.
Yes,
Mahanameva.
I agree with that, but she was certainly happy with the national language policy which was happening in North and East, and she visited and saw the missing person and the youth parliament likewise.
You were part of that.
I went with High Commissioner Navi Pillai on her visits to the north. I was part of her team then. And yes, there was a lot of hostility towards the High Commissioner. There was in the media a lot of attacks, degrading attacks, personalized attacks, gender-based attacks, which is all very unbecoming. And also in her closing statement, she did, while pointing to, whatever positives there might be, she did point out all the issues that were there, that because she met with families that disappeared, she talked about, wartime allegations, all those things, torture, extrajudicial killing, that was all in the statement. So she did not say that everything is hunky-dory here and there were no human rights violations. We can just look at the statement.
I never said that. I said it is a good opportunity if you can even invite the present High Commissioner and see these things and listen to everyone by own. I mean, positive and negative things there. It was a positive thing where government invited Dr. Navanidan Pillai as a commissioner to come and visit. There can be some flaws. There can be, certain, I am not telling mistakes, errors can be there. So why can't we all get together and set up a system rather than, fighting each other?
Nilan, I'd like to get your final thoughts on this. When we speak about lobbying, one of the stakeholders that we can't also ignore is the Tamil diaspora, which engages in massive lobbying out of Sri Lanka specifically. It is one of the key stakeholders. However, there is a massive disengagement with the state, the Sri Lankan state, disengaged from the diaspora. How must we, as a country, how must we engage with the diaspora?
Yeah, so again, I think the first thing we need to do is understand that terms like Tamil and diaspora are not monolithic, homogeneous sort of groups as well, right? So that's one thing. But I agree that because, so the problem is when there is an engagement, right, there has to be some kind of notion that there will be a compromise at the end, right? If the sense that both parties get is that this is going to be prolonged for the sake of prolonging it, that if it's going to be prolonged for the sake of the political interests of either parties here or transnational governments or parties or whatever there, if that's the sense that the two get, then unfortunately it creates a huge rift. You know, and the way that they lobby through the laws of war, that's a particular issue that I think your viewers need to know about, right? Because when we look at the whole issue of war crimes, the first thing we need to understand is that the laws of wars that we have today were never meant to apply to the types of wars that we see today. The laws of wars, all of the major military principles were formed in the 1940s, the current one that we see today. Other than the additional protocol to the Geneva Convention in 1977, there's been no real significant revision to it. It's all geared towards what we call conventional warfare, where there are two armies on either side with uniformed soldiers. There's a clear-cut difference between a battlefield and a non-battlefield. The laws of war today, the Nuremberg trials, all the principles established there were meant to apply to conventional warfare. The kind of operation that countries have to face today, as we did against, let's say, the LTTE, they do not have that kind of hallmarks where you have uniformed soldiers on one side and things like that, right? So we will not be expected to drive out in the traffic with traffic laws from the 1940s. We will not be expected to employ people with labor laws from the 1940s. We will not even be expected to get married with marriage and inheritance laws from the 1940s. But when it comes to this issue of countries being able to defend their national security against non-state actors, countries are somehow expected to abide by laws from the 1940s, and when small countries do manage it, they are then subjected to witch hunts and moral inquisitions, right? Which goes to the question you asked many of the panelists, but you didn't ask me, which is why are they targeting us? Since the post-Cold War world began, there was always this notion being pushed by the human rights industry that wars cannot be ended, that conflict, counterterrorism, prolonged insurgencies cannot be ended with force. And other than the Khalistan insurgency in India, essentially all the other counterinsurgency experiences validated that. So when we did it, it was pretty much a jarring kind of shock to this entire kind of notion of security, to this global idea that a counterinsurgency cannot be crushed with force.
Ambika, if I may ask you about the upcoming sessions, when all is said and done, Sri Lanka will have to eventually face the UNHRC come the 22nd or later on in February. What is the best worst case scenario for Sri Lanka? Because we know the government has rejected the report of the Human Rights Council High Commissioner and also the resolution brought forward by the core group. What is the best worst case scenario for Sri Lanka? How can Sri Lanka, the government, soften the blow at the UNHRC sessions?
Well, when you say worst case scenario, the victims might not think that's the worst case scenario, you know, if whatever the government thinks is the worst case scenario. I mean, in an ideal situation, which we're not going to have, I would say the government should do all those things which it's probably not going to do, which is, you know, ensure that we have independence of the judiciary, which means you'll have to change the constitution again and, you know, make the executive less powerful. You need to have a truth-seeking mechanisms. You need to ensure that civil society and human rights defenders can function without fear, because right now, I don't know whether you know, human rights defenders and civil society organizations in the north and the east, they receive, and there's not...
Why must we make the executive less powerful?
It's about that word we don't like, Sri Lankans, accountability, because concentration of power is never a good thing. And when you have the executive, for instance, making all the appointments, and everyone will be beholden to them, right? So the way that you ensure independence, you also ensure that people are not beholden to just one person, that there is a more broader process, is how you ensure it.
But the process that was adopted from 2015 onwards was something similar. Did that work?
Not really. Actually, that worked to some extent, but I think that cannot even be strengthened even further, because they had the Constitutional Council, which had the Speaker, the Prime Minister, it had, you know, representative of the President, Prime Minister, the smaller parties, 3 civil society. You could apply.
But did that work? Did that work?
It worked to some extent, I would say.
How did it work?
Well, in the sense...
April 21st attacks. Let's look at that. How did it work?
Well, that and this are not connected. How are they connected?
Because it was the Constitutional Council who appointed the IGP at that time.
A person's competence, well, that's also because we found that
if the Constitutional Council cannot decide the competence of the person who they are appointing to a particular post, what is the point of having the Constitutional Council in the first place?
well, okay. That was not just the IGP that was at fault, right? It was also that the president, the intelligence was given to the president, and the president did not.
The IGP was also part of it.
All of them were part of it. So yes, they made a mistake, but.
So let's say, okay. Guess what happened?
That's a point on
that aspect alone, we say, guess what? We made a mistake. Let's correct that mistake. However, we have to have. I'm asking this question why, because
we need a stronger process than even what we had.
And that is why the people thought it was apt to give this. That is why the people thought after the April 21st attacks, it was apt to give this government power, and that is why a 2/3 majority came into play as well.
How is that going?
You tell me. How is it going well?
Is it going well? Let's see.
You tell me.
We have the COVID response, which is not being handled very well, particularly when we look at globally what they're doing. That is being headed by the military and not by health officials. We have environmental degradation. You would have seen reports since you're in the media about land being handed over without due process being followed. We have the president saying, don't worry about circulars, my word is circular. How can an individual's word be circular? How can a public officer be expected to abide by that? Is that law and order? Is that rule of law? Is there certainty in that? Is there accountability?
So let's look at the previous government, okay? Because we're comparing now.
My point is this. I don't compare with something that was worse. Let's compare with something that is better. Even with human rights violations, it's not a competition to say hundreds of and thousands of people died in Yemen, so why haven't they been picked? It's horrific that they have not, and they should be held accountable too. But it's not about who did it worse. Shall we try to do better?
Who has done better because of the UNHRC?
What do you mean, who has done? It's not...
Let's look at Myanmar for an example.
That process is still ongoing.
Yeah, that process is still ongoing. I take your argument there, Ambika. But the problem is, what happened now? There is a military coup in that country.
Exactly, and that goes back to the fact that
and the process is flawed, and the process didn't work in that country. As a result of that,
the coup is also about their governance, internal politics, and it's not necessarily about the investigation into how the Rohingya are treated.
But how fair is it? Then the United States government and several other countries from the West to say, if you do not give the democratically elected government power, that targeted sanctions would be imposed against
the military
Myanmar,
rulers. Let's forget about the US. We don't need to talk about the US, because in Myanmar we have policemen who are joining protests, we have young people, we have the public protesting. So it's not just, let's forget the US or anyone in Myanmar. It's the public that is taking to the roads. What about India? Public. Farmers are taking to the road. So let's forget about US and external powers. What we see globally, our citizens are taking to the road. So this, US and international conspiracy is just an excuse that insecure authoritarian governments use to crack down on dissent.
Can I respond 1 minute? Yeah. Otherwise, this also. I was in Jamaica. I was in Caribbean countries when the COVID was at the top. But Sri Lanka is better, because I am telling comparative. 6 countries I have visited. All these 6 countries are not controlling COVID-19 well. Because of military, Sri Lanka, they try to minimize that. So therefore, you have to see certain factors may highly criticize, nothing done. But on the other hand also, we have to be a little bit fair. They are doing certain things. They are controlling, as well as they try to do their best. So comparatively, I mean, with the Caribbean region, I don't know other countries. I think Sri Lanka in a better stand.
Ambika, what must we do to get some leeway from the international community now? Because now we are cornered somewhat. We are right now on the ledge. So what must we do as a government now to win back the international community?
I would say, firstly, ensure that that principles that democracy is not eroded, that we don't become a theocracy, that you don't give more importance to one particular religion and discriminate against, the numerically smaller communities like the Tamils and the Muslims. Give space to civil society, human rights defenders to function freely, because right now they can't. They are being intimidated, there is surveillance, harassment. They say they are going to bring about a new law to control the institutions and demilitarize. We have civil servants. We have one of the largest public services in the country. Why can't you allow our public servants to run our public institutions? Why do you need to bring military there? Those would be, and what about our laws, like, for instance, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which does not adhere to any international human rights standards.
The government has said that it's currently reviewing the PTA.
Yes, and we hope that, well, if they were reviewing the PTA, Sonali, you as a lawyer would know, you'd probably have to scrap the whole thing, right? Because it has things like admissibility of confession, which creates room for torture. It allows for administrative detention without being produced before a judge for 18 months.
Yeah, but
that's
measures are being
taken.
taken. I mean, we can't...
Yeah, so we look forward to that, but we hope that since we've had enough time and there's enough being written and said and drafts prepared about, these things, that it will be expedited.
The gentleman and the lady, we have to go for a short commercial break. When we come back, we discuss about Sri Lanka's fate at the upcoming United Nations Human Rights Council sessions. It's a last round. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We start off the final round with Neelandan Nirundan, defense analyst. Neelandan, you have uninterrupted 2 minutes to sum up on the subject of Sri Lanka's fate at the United Nations Human Rights Council sessions.
Okay, so point number one, it will all come down to our diplomacy between India and China, in my opinion. All the other issues are fluff. The actual diplomatic issue that will decide this is how we navigate through India and China. The other thing is, I'd just like to add some perspective to what was said before about the sort of army's role and things like that, because there are two areas in which I kind of have a little bit of actual knowledge. The first is in the rehabilitation of ex-combatants, which I think we need to be comparative. So compare the record of this country in general, regardless of which government, right? Compare our track record in terms of rehabilitating ex-combatants and compare that with the way that, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, right? Compare that with their experience in rehabilitation. Our model has been a lot more successful. I think all of you remember about a year or two ago when that guy stabbed a bunch of people in London, right? He had been in a counter-radicalization program for like 6 years. And once that counter-radicalization program was done, he grabbed a knife and he stabbed a bunch of people. That kind of relapse of violence being prevented, I don't think can be underestimated. The second is also in terms of demining and stuff like that, right? If you look at comparable countries like Cambodia, Angola, who face this problem, I would once again kind of say that our track record comparatively is actually very good compared to anyone else in a position like this, right? So while I agree that the transitional justice process does have kind of issues and problems, I think the sort of this perspective is important as well, that on many major indicators, even though this might not be reflected in kind of the human rights narrative, on many major issues, we actually have a much more successful track record of turning to a new page than many countries who have tried their own models.
Right, thank you very much. Neelandan Nirundan, defense analyst. I now move my attention to Ambika Satguranathan, former Commissioner, Human Rights Commissioner of Sri Lanka. The time starts now on the subject of Sri Lanka's fate at the UNHRC.
Fate, well, more than fate, I would say what I feel we should be looking at is the state of democracy in Sri Lanka, because we have seen many moves by the by the new government that undermine this. As I said, it's about powerful executive undermining independence of institutions like the Human Rights Commission, the judiciary, militarization, crackdown on dissent, crackdown on civil society, surveillance, etc. So I think that we definitely need to pay attention to. And the other thing is, in dealing with the past, it is about acknowledging that there was an ethnic conflict in this country and the root causes of the ethnic conflict have not been addressed. And therefore, without addressing that, however hard you might try to move on, it will just not be possible. And I think history has shown us this. We do not need to be in denial. Just Google. Now you don't even need to refer a book. Just Google. So I think we need to address the past. Without that, it's not possible. And also not just in terms of the North and the East. There are inequalities all over the country, as we have seen a lot even now. What happened to the free trade zone workers, what is happening to the migrant workers now because of COVID, the agricultural workers, the day laborers, those are all inequalities, right? So I think inequality is a big issue, and the ethnic conflict, the root causes of the conflict, they definitely need to be addressed.
Right, thank you very much, Ambika. We now move our attention to Professor Attorney at Law Pratibha Mahanamaheva, also former Commissioner of the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka.
I think the forthcoming UNHRC sessions, we must have some alternative, resolutions. At least we have to get ready with our camp and ready to counter it. Now, one thing where the money transferring for the terrorists, even in Sri Lanka, UN said ISIL there. Everyone silent about talking about terrorism. So this is where the ISIL group now in Sri Lanka. So you have to act according to the money laundering laws. So it must come with the counter-terrorist laws. And also I think the president said he will rule the country by Buddhist philosophy. I think that is good thing. Even last government there was Lichavi system under former Prime Minister. I don't know. No one is talking about that system. So someone is talking about one system. So I mean, we have to be balanced all the time. So you can criticize and you can give solutions. But I mean, everyone, we are interested for the mother country. We are sitting here because of our soldiers who saved us, because of our war heroes who saved this country. So that's why I am breathing the whole Sri Lanka. Otherwise, this is under a state of terrorism. But still, terrorism, military, we have, defeated. But transnational government is ready to take that with different systems. So they are using UNHRC. They are using the powerful state nations to put certain resolutions without reviewing and studying this. So our ambassadors, they also have a duty. Our Geneva permanent representative, he is having a duty. So he must educate and the awareness. Still I can remember Dr. Navanithan Pillai's last statement, education is the best. So human right education, it must come as a school subject and it must be spread everywhere. So those are some of the strategies we have to save Mother Sri Lanka.
Right, thank you very much, Professor. We now move to Dr. Jehan Pereira, Executive Director, National Peace Council of Sri Lanka.
As I said earlier, the UN Human Rights Commissioner's report is a very strong one, and it contains a lot of allegations, accusations against the country, against the government, and I think many of them are fact-based, such as the issue of intimidation of civil society, because even we experience some of that. However, if you look at the recommendations that the UN High Commission has given, I think they are very reasonable ones. I mean, out of the 11 recommendations she has given, only one of those pertains to the issue of war crimes and accountability. Now, at the UN Human Rights Council, it is not simply the High Commissioner's report that will be the deciding factor. It is the 47 countries. And among those 47 countries are countries that realize the geopolitical importance of Sri Lanka. They don't want to drive us away. They don't want to drive us into the hands of other countries to whom we might have to go to. So this is a point on which Sri Lanka can negotiate. Now, I believe the major problem for Sri Lanka is the two problems are the issue of accountability and war crimes. I mean, the majority of people in Sri Lanka actually don't want to go into that issue. The majority means the Sinhala majority, because for the Sinhala majority, the end of the war was the best thing. The government also doesn't want to go into that, because the government leadership was there at that time of that war. So we have to realize that that is really not a negotiable at this time. Also, the issue of sovereignty, very important to Sri Lanka. We don't want international judges and hybrid courts in this country. But everything else, my belief is everything else is negotiable. And actually there is a need. I'm glad that there is external pressure on Sri Lanka, because otherwise we have a government that has shown it can win with the votes of the majority community only. But it's not only this is not the country only of the majority, it's a country of the minorities too. And so, because this government is less responsive to the minority, we need the external pressure. But that external pressure, I think, can be negotiated with if we follow what the president said. He said, I'm a Sinhala Buddhist, but I will govern according to the Buddhist ethos. And what is the Buddhist ethos? Equal rights for everyone, treating everyone alike. If he puts that into practice, I think we can deal with the international community very well, and they will support us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jehan Perera, Executive Director of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. Yes.
Yeah, just one thing I think it's important to say. I think Dr. Mahana Maheva implied...
No, but if you make a comment, Ambika, I need to give Dr. Mahana Maheva also an opportunity to respond to that.
Sure. Of course. Dr. Mahana implied that, I might have written the report, and I would like to categorically say that I did not. That although I worked for the High Commissioner's office for many years...
Professor, can you respond to that? Or do you want to respond to that?
I never said that.
Yeah.
But there was an implication, and
I don't know. It's up to you. So most of the things came up in this
that's
report.
because I work
facts.
in human
Thank you
rights.
very much. So we have to end the show on that note anyway. Thank you very much, Imran Niruthan, Defence Analyst. Thank you very much, Professor Mahana Maheva, Dr. Jehan Perera, as well as Ambika Satkurunathan for joining us this evening on the show tonight. Thank you very much, Sonali. Attorney at Law, Sonali Vandiwaduge. It's always a pleasure to have you on board. Thanks a lot, Jayamal, as well as Nadine, for joining us this evening on the show. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. A bridge and a wall are made of the same material, but a bridge joins people and wall divides the people. Choose the right one. Take care and good night.